Hello YouTube, my name is Daniel and welcome back to another Android video. In this video we're going to be taking a look at WorkManager. WorkManager is a Jetpack library which allows you to schedule deferrable and asynchronous work. So an example of this could be querying the API and then storing that data in a database, or background sync tasks, or uploading files to an API. So let's say if you've got a large data set that you need to upload to your backend, and it may take a considerable amount of time, you may want to defer that work to a later stage, and this is what we will use WorkManager for. So I'm going to be implementing this in an app that I've already created. So this is my Game Deals app, which is currently on the Play Store, and all it does is it has a list of different online game stores up here, such as Steam, Gamersgate and Direct2Drive, and it has a list of games. You can scroll through them and then you can select the game. Brings you to a detail screen where you've got image of the game and the latest price, and you can either select Get Deal, which will open the browser and will show you the game deal where the user can then purchase it, or you can save it if you want to view it at a later date. And I have a section for these saved games just down here where your saved deals will appear. So I'm going to create a background task to query the game API and then save these deals into our database. This page here is already retrieving for the database, so we don't need to do any extra work there. So all it's going to do is retrieve games from the API, store it into the DB, and that way we will get the up-to-date prices and the up-to-date information. So firstly, I'm going to add the WorkManager dependency for Kotlin. So the version I'm going to be using is 2.7.1, and then you just have to have this implementation line down here, and then we can start working on it. So I'm going to go with this utils class, and I'm going to add in a WorkManager class here, and I'm going to call this game sync worker. And in order to use this class with WorkManager, we will need to implement the coroutine worker class. So coroutine worker, and that is going to take a context and params as well, which will be WorkManager params, and this will need to be initialized in our constructor. So context, which will be the context, and the params, which will be worker params. So worker parameters, and then we just need to run import here, and then we're going to need to implement some members here. So it's just the do work function, and this is the function that will get called every time depending on the constraints that we set, and we're going to be handling that later. But for the moment we're just going to define the actual job that we're going to do. You can obviously create other functions down here, such as retrieving data from DB and the API, but as it's just a small function, I'm just going to write all of it into this body here, but normally you should separate out. So firstly, I'm just going to declare some variables up here for my DB and for my API. So my DB is the game DAO, and I can get this from my app module, and that will be provide game DAO, and I'm just going to pass the context which we get in the constructor and import it here, and another variable for my API, and that is going to be game API, and that is going to also get that from the app module, so app module.provide game API. Now I'm going to declare my games list, so that will be games from API, and we can get this from the API just above, so API.get store deals. So this is just going to be getting the deals for a specific store, and we're just going to be using a store ID of 1. Which will be Steam. So this job will get all of the latest deals from Steam and then store it into our DB. We could then expand this later on to add even more jobs for different stores. So that's a string of 1, and then the page size. So this is the amount of games we want on each page, and I'm just going to put 30. And now I just need to store these in the DB. So that'll be db.insert store deals. And then I pass it the games from the API. And for this do work function, we need to return a result. So that can be either result.success or result.failure, depending on what happens. And underneath the do work function, we're going to create a companion object, and this is going to store our work requests and also our constraints. So constraints are essentially rules that WorkManager needs to follow in order to run this task. So rules, for example, could be setting a required network type. So in order for this worker to run, we will need to have a network type of connected. Another rule could be saying that we require the battery not to be low, or that we require the device to be idle. In order to set these, we need to create a constraints builder. So that would be constraints.builder. And then we just need to add in our constraints. So just like I said earlier, we've got a set requires battery not low. So we want to make sure the battery is not low before we run this task. And similar with the network type, we want to make sure we have a certain network type. Requires storage not low, requires charging. There's loads of options here, so we can really get granular on when we want to run this task. So if we've got a really intensive task, such as uploading a large data set to a server, we may want to make sure that that device is charging or that it's in idle state, and probably that the storage is not low if we're also going to be syncing down data to the device. For my job, I'm just going to be setting the required network type. So that will be network type.connected. But we can see here we've got metered. So that will be if the user isn't using Wi-Fi and they're using their 3G or 4G network. And then we can also select like not roaming, not required, or temporary unmetered. I'm just going to select connected. And I'm also going to set battery not low. And then just pass in true for that. So those are my constraints. And next we're going to be creating our work request builders. So firstly we have a periodic work request. And what this will do is define how often we want this WorkManager task to run. The minimum is restricted to 15 minutes, so if you pass it a time lower than 15 minutes, it will just default to 15 minutes. So that's what I'm going to be scheduling this for. If you want a task that runs more frequently than every 15 minutes, you might have to look at other services such as Alarm Manager. WorkManager does unfortunately have this restriction. So this will be periodic work request builder, and then you pass it in the class, which is game sync worker. And then we just pass in our time units. So that's going to be 15 for the repeat interval and the time unit of minutes. And in here you can specify days, hours, milliseconds, nanoseconds, loads of options. And then we need to set our constraints, which we create just above. And then we just build the work request here. And then we have another one, which is a one-time work request. And this is used for non-repeating work. So if you just want to execute a one-time work request to do this job once, you can use a one-time work request, and you could do this like on a button click or wherever you need. If a certain thing fails in your app and you want to execute a one-time work request to send some data to the API, you could use this for that. And the WorkManager will handle when it gets ran, but it will be pretty much as soon as possible. And to get rid of this error, we just need to add .build underneath constraints, and then that goes away there. For the one-time work request builder, you just need to do one-time work request builder and pass in the class again. and then set our constraints. Pass in the constraints and select build. Aside from the constraints, we can also set a retry policy. So this is in set back off criteria. And this is where we can set how we want to manage if a task fails, when we want to retry it, and whether we want it to be exponential. So let's say if we set a back off criteria for 15 minutes, if it then fails again, we want that to then increase maybe to 20 minutes and again for 25 minutes, because we don't want to keep trying a task that is failing. Similarly, we can set a delay. If you require an initial delay for a certain task, you can also put that in here. So there's loads of options when configuring WorkManager. But for our basic setup, this should be all we need. And now I'm going to go ahead and implement this into my app. So I'm just going to be adding it in the onCreate of my first fragment for the periodic work request. I'm just going to show you how we make sure we don't add in multiple work requests and we always only have one. So I'm just going to go ahead and write it in now. So in order to set up our reoccurring job, we need to run WorkManager and then import that. And then we need to access Git instance, pass in the context, and then we need this method here, enqueue unique periodic work. And then we need to give it a name. Normally we just pass like a constant variable, but I'm just going to call this sync steam deals. Then we need to pass in an existing periodic work policy. So existing periodic work policy, and then I'm going to select keep. So if we've already got this work policy in place, we'll just ignore it, or you can also replace it. I'm just going to select keep. And then we need to pass in our periodic work request, which is sync game sync worker dot periodic work request. And that will enqueue our job, and that should start running every 15 minutes. I'm also going to add in a one-time work request so we can see how that works. And in order to save time, I'm just going to be adding a click listener to this image here. So when we click the image, it's going to execute this one-time work request. Normally you'll probably put this into settings or something, but this is just to save time. So I'm going to go into my game deal activity and then add this click listener in. Game image view dot set on click listener. And again, we need to import WorkManager. And use the get instance method and pass in the contact, which should be this. And then we're going to use the begin unique work method. And we need to pass in the name. So this will be one time Steam deal sync. And then an existing work policy. And for this one, I'm also going to use keep. So if there's like an uncompleted one-time task, we want that to finish, either return like failure or successful before we execute a new one. And then we just need to pass in our worker, which will be game sync worker dot one time work request. And then we need to call the enqueue method here. And that should be all we need to set up our periodic work request and also our one-time work request here. So I'm going to run the app and we're going to see if it works. So the app is now running, and what I've done is I've brought up the log cat, so we should be able to see the task running. So I'm going to click on this game here and then click on the image. And then we can see here in our log cat that the worker result has shown a successful message and the job was completed successfully. And we can click it again and we keep getting these success messages to show that WorkManager is working correctly and that a task was completed. And now I'm just going to wait around 15 minutes for the next lot of WorkManager tasks to be completed. So I'll come back and let's see if this works. So I've just come back 15 minutes later and we can see another WorkManager task has just run here, and that has gone ahead and completed successfully. And these will continue to run indefinitely until the app is installed. or there's another process which cancels the work manager task. This worker job will also run when the app is in the background. So if the user puts the app into the background like so, and just goes away and navigates to another app, the work will still continue to be completed. If the app is fully closed out and then terminated, there's a bit of discrepancy of whether the worker will actually run depending on the manufacturer. So some manufacturers will continue to run the work manager task, but others will only do it if you have a certain permission. So just double check whether you really need to run the worker job if the app is like fully closed down, but it will work totally fine if it's in the background. So yeah guys, that'll be it for this video. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments. I will put a link to the WorkManager docs on the Google page in the description of this video. So yeah, please like the video and please subscribe.